What if I told you that for most of human history, people did not sleep through the night? Not kings, not peasants, not monks, not soldiers, not even children. For centuries, across medieval Europe, people expected to wake up in the middle of the night, and they did it on purpose. They called it the first sleep and the second sleep. And what happened in between those two sleeps would seem unbelievably strange, intimate, spiritual, and sometimes deeply unsettling to a modern American mind. Tonight, you're about to step into a medieval village after sunset, where darkness was not the end of the day, but the beginning of a secret life most people today have completely forgotten. The sun had already fallen behind the low hills when the bell of St. Cuthbert's Chapel rang its slow, hollow note across the village. There were no streetlights, no glowing windows, no candles burning for comfort, only the last red streaks of twilight, and then pure darkness. In the year 1287, in a small English village called Wychford, night arrived like a heavy curtain dropped over the world. Once it came, life did not simply slow down, it stopped. Because medieval people feared the night in a way modern people cannot understand. Darkness was not peaceful. Darkness was danger. Spirits, demons, thieves, wolves, sickness, and God's judgment were all believed to move more freely after sunset. The Bible warned of it. Priests preached about it. Stories reinforced it. And so, as the last light faded, villagers rushed inside their homes. Doors barred, shutters latched, fires dimmed to embers, not to save energy, but to survive. Inside one of those low timber houses lived a farmer named Thomas, his wife Eleanor, his mother Agnes, and their 3 children. The house had one room, a dirt floor, a central hearth, no chimney. Smoke drifted lazily upward into the rafters before escaping through holes in the thatch. There were no bedrooms, no privacy, no beds in the way you know them, just piles of straw, rough blankets, and everyone sleeping together for warmth and safety. And here is where the strange part begins. They did not stay awake until late. They did not chat by candlelight. They did not wind down. Instead, shortly after dusk, often around 7 p.m., the entire family went to sleep. Immediately. This was called the first sleep, and they expected to wake up. Modern people think waking in the middle of the night is a sleep disorder. For medieval people, it was normal, natural, and planned. Around midnight, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, Thomas's eyes would open. No alarm, no noise, no disturbance. His body simply knew. He had slept for 3 or 4 hours. That was enough. Beside him, Eleanor would also stir. Across the straw, Agnes would cough softly and sit up. Even the children, sometimes, would wake. And this was not an accident. This period was known as the Watch, and what happened during the Watch is what modern historians find most astonishing. They did not try to fall back asleep. They did not feel annoyed. They did not toss and turn. They used this time. Thomas would reach into the embers of the hearth and coax a small flame from the coals. Just enough light to see. Just enough warmth to keep away the creeping cold. The house became dim, smoky, and strangely quiet. Outside, the village was silent. No animals, no voices, no movement. Just blackness. This was the safest time of night to think, pray, talk, or do things that required privacy from the day. And medieval people did many things during this time. Some prayed. Some visited neighbors. Some worked. Some whispered. Some had sex. Yes, historical records, court documents, and medical texts from the Middle Ages repeatedly mention that the time between the first and second sleep was considered the best time for intimacy between husband and wife. Doctors even recommended it. Why? Because the body was rested, the mind was calm, the children were usually asleep, and the night offered privacy that the day never could. In fact, A French medical text from the 1400s specifically says, after the first sleep, couples should engage in their marital duties, for the body is then most disposed. This was normal advice, not scandalous, not secret, expected, but intimacy was only one part. Many people used the watch for spiritual reflection. Medieval Christians believed the night was a time when God listened more closely. Monks had structured prayers specifically at this hour, called matins. Even peasants followed similar patterns. Eleanor would sometimes kneel beside the hearth and whisper prayers into the smoke. Agnes would count her rosary beads in the faint glow. Thomas would sit quietly, staring into the coals, thinking. Not worrying, not planning, thinking. Historians believe this period was one of the only times in medieval life when people experienced true mental stillness. No labor, no noise, no demands. Just silence and thought, something most modern people rarely experience. But the watch was also when the strange stories began. Because if someone knocked on your door during the watch, you did not open it. No one should be outside at this hour. No one good. Village folklore was full of warnings about spirits and creatures that roamed between the sleeps. The night mare, a demon believed to sit on your chest while you slept. The black shuck, a ghostly dog with red eyes. Witches said to wander fields collecting herbs in moonlight, and perhaps most terrifying of all, other humans. Thieves and criminals knew this pattern of sleep. They knew people were awake, but drowsy, alert, but vulnerable. Records from medieval court trials show many crimes occurred during the watch, not because people were asleep, but because they were in this strange, half-awake state. After an hour, sometimes two, people grew naturally tired again. The fire dimmed, voices quieted, and without ceremony, everyone laid back down. This was the second sleep, and it lasted until dawn. When the rooster crowed, Thomas did not feel groggy. He did not feel sleep-deprived. He had slept twice. His body had followed a rhythm humans had used for thousands of years. A rhythm modern life has completely erased. Historians only rediscovered this pattern recently. For centuries, people assumed medieval writings about first sleep were poetic, until a historian named Roger Eckertz found over 500 historical references to segmented sleep in diaries, court records, literature, and medical texts. It was everywhere. People didn't sleep through the night. That idea came much later, after street lighting, factory work, and artificial light changed human life forever. Before electricity, humans did not sleep like you do. They slept like Thomas. And tonight, as you sit under electric light, staring at a glowing screen, you are living in a world completely unnatural to your ancestors. But for Thomas, the night had only just begun. Because on this particular night in Weichford, something was wrong, very wrong. During the watch, as he sat by the embers, Thomas heard something no villager ever wanted to hear. A knock, soft, slow, on the wooden door, and everyone in the house froze. Agnes stopped praying. Eleanor's eyes widened. The children did not move, because no one should be outside during the watch. No one. Thomas did not stand. He did not speak. The knock came again, and then a voice, whispering through the wood. Thomas, open the door. He knew that voice, and that made it worse. It belonged to his neighbor, Matthew, who had been buried 3 days ago. Thomas did not move. He did not breathe. The tiny flame in the hearth snapped softly, sending a brief flicker of orange across the smoke-black rafters. Everyone in the room stared at the door, as if it had become a living thing. Thomas, open. The voice was hoarse, weak, scraping, but unmistakable. Matthew Carter had been buried at sunset 3 days ago. Thomas himself had helped lower the body into the frozen ground behind St. Cuthbert's Chapel. He had felt the weight of the corpse, cold, rigid, lifeless, and now that voice was outside, Agnes began whispering prayers so quickly, her words tangled together. Eleanor clutched the children closer. One of them began to whimper, but she pressed his face into her chest to muffle the sound. Because in medieval belief, this was not merely frightening. This was a sign. Something had gone terribly wrong in the natural order. In the Middle Ages, people believed sleep was dangerously close to death. You lay still, your eyes closed, your body cold, your breathing slow. Many believed the soul actually left the body during sleep and wandered the world. That is why waking suddenly was considered risky. Why dreams were treated as messages. Why the watch, the time between sleeps, was believed to be when the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. And now, during that sacred and fearful hour, a dead man was calling. Thomas stood slowly, not because he wanted to, but because every instinct told him that ignoring it would be worse. He took a burning stick from the hearth and walked toward the door. Each step sounded too loud in the silent house. The dirt floor seemed to swallow his feet. "Thomas," the voice whispered again. Not louder, closer, as if the speaker's mouth was pressed against the wood. He stopped an arm's length away from the door. He did not touch it. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice cracked. There was a long pause. Then, "Cold," Agnes gasped. Eleanor shut her eyes. Because everyone in medieval Europe knew the stories. The revenant. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but a corpse that walked. A body that rose from the grave when it had died with unfinished sins, curses, or evil clinging to it. And the first thing a revenant always said was that it was cold. These were not fairy tales. Medieval records across England, France, and Germany describe villagers digging up graves, finding bodies bloated with gases from decay, and believing they had been walking at night, spreading sickness. Entire villages believed the dead could physically rise and knock on doors. And they often did something horrifying to stop it. They would exhume the body and mutilate it. Because to them, this was not superstition. This was survival. Thomas did not open the door. He backed away slowly. The voice outside began to change. Not angry, not louder, but more desperate. "Thomas, please, let me in." The words dragged like something caught in mud. And then came the scratching, fingernails against wood. Agnes screamed. Thomas rushed forward and shoved a heavy wooden bench against the door. The children were crying now. Eleanor was shaking. And outside, the scratching stopped. Silence returned. But it was worse than the noise, because now they could hear something else. Breathing, right on the other side of the door. Time passed strangely during the watch. Minutes felt like hours. No one spoke. No one moved. And then, as slowly as it had begun, the breathing faded. The presence lifted. The night returned to its unnatural stillness. Thomas did not sleep again. Not during the second sleep. Not that night. Not ever the same way again. At dawn, when the rooster crowed and weak gray light crept through the shutters, Thomas ran to the chapel. Several other villagers were already there, and he could see it in their faces. They had heard it too. Different doors, different houses, same voice, Matthew's voice, calling to them in the night. During the watch, the priest, Father Aldwin, did not dismiss them. He did not laugh, because he knew the records. He knew the stories, and he knew what must be done. By mid-morning, half the village stood around Matthew's grave. The ground was still fresh and loose. Men dug quickly. No one spoke. When the coffin lid was pried open, several people gagged. Matthew's body had swollen grotesquely. His face puffed. His lips pulled back from his teeth. Dark fluid seeped from his mouth. To a modern person, this is normal decomposition. To a medieval villager, this was proof. Proof he had been walking. Proof he had been knocking. Proof the night was not meant to be trusted. Father Aldwin gave the order. They rolled the body over, drove a wooden stake through its chest, and burned the remains before reburying the ashes. This was not cruelty. This was protection. And everyone felt safer. Because now, Matthew could not wander during the watch. But something changed in Whiteford after that. People no longer welcomed the watch as a peaceful time. It became a fearful hour. Families stayed closer together. Fires burned slightly brighter. Prayers lasted longer. And many began trying to avoid waking up between sleeps. But they couldn't. Their bodies still followed the ancient rhythm. They still woke. They still lay in the dark, listening. This is something historians rarely talk about. Segmented sleep didn't just create quiet reflection. It created hours of vulnerability. You were awake in the middle of total darkness, when imagination was strongest and fear was loudest. And medieval life was full of beliefs that fed that fear. Demons, witches, the walking dead, God's judgment. Sign crawling through the night air. The watch became the most psychologically intense time of the day. A time when the mind had nothing to distract it. No light, no noise, no work, just thoughts and shadows. Over the following weeks, strange reports spread through nearby villages. People claimed to see figures walking roads at night. Others heard whispering outside shutters. A woman swore she saw her dead sister sitting at the foot of her straw bed during the watch. Whether real, imagined, or fueled by exhaustion and darkness, one truth remained. Medieval people spent 1 to 2 hours every night awake in pitch-black silence. And the human mind does strange things in that environment. Thomas began dreading the first sleep because he knew what came after. The waking, the listening, the waiting. He tried staying awake longer after sunset, but without candles to waste and no light to see by, there was nothing to do. And his body always surrendered. He always fell into the first sleep, and always woke, right on time. One night, unable to bear lying still, he stepped outside during the watch. This was forbidden. No one left their home at this hour. But fear had become worse than curiosity. The village was a black void. No moon. No stars through the clouds. He could not see his own hands. Only the faint glow of his own doorway behind him. And then he heard it. Not a voice. Not a knock. But footsteps. Somewhere in the dark. Moving slowly along the path between houses. He was not alone. And whoever it was had also woken between sleeps. Thomas could not see the figure, but he could hear it. Soft steps on frozen earth. A slow, careful movement through the village paths, as if whoever walked knew exactly where each house stood, without needing light to guide them. Thomas's heart pounded so loudly, he feared it would give him away. He stood frozen just outside his door, the faint glow from the hearth behind him casting a weak orange line onto the ground. The footsteps stopped. Somewhere between his house and the well, silence returned, thick and pressing. Then came something worse than movement. A whisper, not calling his name, not speaking words. Just the sound of a human voice murmuring to itself in the dark. Thomas rushed back inside and barred the door. He did not wait to learn who it was, because in medieval life, one rule mattered above all during the watch. If you are outside, you are not safe. The next morning, the mystery was solved in the most unsettling way possible. Old Margaret, a widow who lived near the edge of the village, was found asleep beside the well, barefoot, wrapped only in a wool shawl. Alive, but confused. She had no memory of leaving her house, no memory of walking. She remembered lying down after the first sleep, and then waking up in daylight on the ground. The priest called it wandering of the soul. Agnes called it possession. But today, we call it something else, sleepwalking. And historians now believe segmented sleep made sleepwalking far more common, because waking and sleeping were not clean breaks. They overlapped. People drifted in and out of consciousness for hours every night, in total darkness, in total silence, with minds half dreaming, half awake, the perfect conditions for the body to move without the mind. This is one of the most overlooked facts about medieval sleep. It was not restful in the way we imagine. It was fragmented, psychologically intense, and often frightening. People didn't just rest during the night. They experienced long stretches of wakefulness where imagination, fear, faith, and exhaustion mixed together. And over centuries, this shaped medieval culture in ways we barely recognize. Ghost stories, demon beliefs, religious visions, night terrors. All of them were fueled by the watch, that strange, forgotten period between sleeps. But something was about to change in the world. Something that would erase the watch forever. Not a new belief, not a new religion, but a new invention. Artificial light. By the late Middle Ages and into the early modern period, candles became cheaper. Oil lamps improved. Cities began installing street lanterns. People could stay awake after sunset without wasting precious resources. And for the first time in human history, night was no longer absolute. People started staying awake later, talking longer, working later, socializing after dark. They delayed the first sleep, and something fascinating happened. They stopped waking in the middle of the night. Historians believe segmented sleep did not disappear because humans changed. It disappeared because light changed us. When people went to bed later, closer to true exhaustion, the body no longer woke naturally after 4 hours. It stayed asleep. The first and second sleep merged into one. And within a few generations, people forgot it had ever been different. Writings about first sleep stopped appearing in literature. Medical texts stopped mentioning it. The watch vanished from memory, until modern historians rediscovered it buried in old documents. Thomas never saw that future. He lived his entire life in the rhythm of 2 sleeps. But as months passed after Matthew's death, something else changed in Whiteford. People began keeping small candles lit during the watch, just a tiny flame, enough to push back the crushing darkness, enough to calm the mind, enough to stop shadows from becoming demons. And slowly, the watch lost its terror. It returned to being what it had once been, a quiet, thoughtful hour in the middle of the night, a time to talk softly, to pray, to think, to be human without noise. Thomas began to use it differently, too. Instead of sitting in fear, he would step outside with a lantern. He would walk a few steps into the night air, listen to the wind, look at the stars when the sky was clear. He realized something that most modern people never experience. The night was not meant to be rushed through. It was meant to be lived in, gently, slowly, in silence. Years later, when Thomas was an old man, he told his grandchildren about the night Matthew knocked on the door. They listened in wide-eyed silence. But what stayed with them was not the fear. It was the idea that waking in the night was normal, natural, even meaningful. And for generations, people in Whiteford still spoke of the watch, long after other places had forgotten it. Today, if you wake up at 2 a.m., you think something is wrong. You reach for your phone, you check the time. You feel frustrated. You try desperately to fall back asleep. But for most of human history, that moment was expected, welcomed, used. Your ancestors did not panic when they woke in the night. They lived there for a while, in a world without noise, without light, without distraction, just thoughts, breath, and darkness. Modern sleep scientists now believe this ancient pattern may actually be more natural for the human brain. Experiments where people are exposed only to natural light cycles show that, after a few weeks, they begin to sleep exactly like Thomas did. First sleep, wakefulness. Second sleep, the body remembers what the world has forgotten. The strange sleep habits of medieval people were not foolish. They were human, shaped by darkness, shaped by fear, shaped by faith, and shaped by a world without artificial light. They lived every night in two parts, and in between, they experienced something we rarely allow ourselves today: stillness, reflection, and a quiet confrontation with their own minds. So tonight, if you wake up in the middle of the night, don't panic, don't reach for the screen, don't fight it. You may simply be experiencing something ancient, something medieval, something deeply, strangely human. You may have entered the watch